Welcome to Serve Standard number 5. After this session, we'll have one more remaining. Thank you for being so faithful and following along with us. Let's do a quick recap as we do each time. Serve Standard number 1 is serve others. It's not about me. Serve Standard number 2, serve as a team. Never do ministry alone. Serve Standard number 3, serve selflessly. Doing the right thing at the right time with the right attitude. Serve Standard number 4, serve with excellence because everything communicates something. And today we're going to look at Serve Standard number 5, serve without bias. Serve without bias means treat everyone as an honored guest. We don't let personal preference or bias or prejudice keep us from serving others. If we're being completely honest, though, most of us have some kind of bias or prejudice already within us. I wrote down just a couple as we get started today. Maybe your bias is against skinny people, and you look at them and say, "What's wrong with them? Why don't they just eat?" Or maybe it's the not so skinny people, and you say, "Why don't they just have some self-discipline and push the plate away every once in a while?" Maybe it's wealthy people. Well, it was probably just handed to them. Maybe it's poor people. Why don't they just go and get a job? Maybe it's young people. They're so disrespectful, naive, they don't understand. Maybe it's older people. They just don't get it. The world's passed them by. Maybe your bias is with smart people. They think they know it all. Or maybe it's the less than smart people. Why don't they have just a little common sense? Maybe your bias is with people of color or people who are white. Maybe it's Republicans or Democrats, people from the East, Midwest, or the West Coast. Maybe it's foreign people. Maybe it's addicted people. Maybe it's people who are in an alternative lifestyle. Or maybe it's from broken home people. Or maybe it's the single parent people. Or maybe it's single people themselves. Or even married people or divorced people. Have I hit them all yet? Have I got them all? Well, the truth is probably not, because there are so many biases within our culture today, so much prejudice that exists, that we felt it was important for us to make this one of our serve standards, that we're going to serve without, as much as we can, without bias, to treat everyone as an honored guest. You know, Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 and 4 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you should look at the interests of the others." It's saying that you should serve with humility, that we should value everyone that we come in contact with, even above our own selves, which isn't always easy to do. Jesus didn't die, let me remind you, for just some or just a few. Jesus died for all. When we don't include everyone in our circle of love, then we're just simply not being Christ-like. We need to serve without bias, without prejudice. Treat everyone as an honored guest. You were created to serve and to be like Jesus. Think about it this way. Someone's life depends upon your service, because when I serve, I am being most like Jesus. Many times in scriptures, God doesn't reveal himself in the grandest of ways. Like Elijah, we find him not in the wind or in the earthquake or in the fire, but instead in that small, still voice. In fact, Owen Feltham says this: "Of all the trees I observe, God hath chosen the vine, the lowest plant that creeps upon the helpful wall. Of all the beasts, a soft and patient lamb. Of all the fowls, the mild and guileless dove. Christ is the rose of the field. He is the lily of the valley. And when God appeared to Moses, it was not in some lofty cedar, nor sturdy oak, nor the spreading plain, but in a brush, a humble, abject shrub, as if he would say, by his own elections, check the conceited arrogance of man at the door." See, God showed himself in a way that opened himself up to be lesser. In fact, Jesus said that it said of Jesus, he was the meekest of us all. Now, meekness isn't weakness. It is just a position of attitude. It's a place where we value other people who've been made in the image and likeness of God, who deserve to be treated as equals. They deserve to be treated without and served without bias. Tony Campolo tells a story one time that he was walking down Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, and there was this filthy bum. I mean, he was covered with soot from head to toe. He had a huge beard, and everything that he had eaten in the days previous was hanging in that beard. Rotten food was stuck in it. It smelled. You could sense it as you came across the guy. On this particular day, he had a cup of coffee in his hand, and he was mumbling along the street, and then he spotted Tony Campolo. He said, "Hey, mister, you want some of my coffee?" He said, "I knew I should drink some of it just to be nice." And said, "So I did." Took a sip and then I gave it back to him. I said, "Hey, you're a pretty generous guy giving away your coffee this morning. What's gotten into you? Why are you giving away your coffee all of a sudden?" He said, "Well, the coffee was especially delicious this morning. And I figured that God gives you something, you ought to share it with somebody else." I figured this was the perfect setup. So I said, "Is there anything that I can give you in return?" "I'm sure he's going to hit me up for $5, Tony Campolo said. He said, "Yeah, sure. Can you give me a hug?" Boy, I was hoping for the $5. He puts his arms around me, and he puts it around me so tight. He began to squeeze, and then I realized he wasn't going to let go, Tony said. He was holding on to me. I'm an established guy, and this bum, here he is holding on to me. People are passing by. People are beginning to stare at us. It's becoming a little bit of a situation. I'm embarrassed, and little by little, my embarrassment begins to turn in awe as I hear this small, still voice echoing down the corridors of time saying to me, "I was hungry. Did you feed me? I was naked. Did you clothe me? And I was sick. Did you care for me? I was a bum on a street you met, and did you hug me? For if you did it unto the least of these, my brothers and sisters, then you did it unto me. And if you failed to do it unto the least of these, then you failed to do it unto me." I think God's called us to something far greater than ourselves. To begin to see others as God sees them. Trophies of grace. Opportunities to receive God's supernatural grace and forgiveness. People that we should serve without bias. We have no idea the gifts, the talents, and the abilities and the destiny that God has placed within each man's heart. Psalm 41:1 said, "Blessed is he who considers the poor. The Lord will deliver him when it's his time of trouble that comes." Proverbs 19:17 says, "He that hath pity upon the poor lends to the Lord, and that which he hath given will he repay him again." John Bunyan said it this way, "He who bestows his goods upon the poor shall have as much again and 10 times more." There's just a built-in reward for giving and giving to the poor and giving without bias. Faith Chapel, we want to give without bias. As much as it depends upon us, can we give without prejudice in our hearts? Can we give with it and serve that way? In your notes, characteristics of serving the Lord in humility. I've taken this from Acts chapter 20, verse 19. "I serve the Lord with great humility and with tears," Paul said, "and in the midst of severe testing by the plots of my Jewish opponents." He said, number one, he served with lowliness, with humility. The first thing that Paul has to say about being a servant of the Lord, he says, is that we're to serve with humility, with lowliness. Lowliness and humility is first then a feeling that God has the absolute right to do with our life whatever he wants to do and however he wants to do it. It's yielding all of our life to him. He has absolute authority over our life. That's what Paul's communicating to the church. It is a spirit of utter yieldedness and submissiveness to the Lord because He is the master of our life. Well, it's kind of like this lump of clay. You probably have heard in Scripture that He's the potter and we're the lump of clay that's on that potter's wheel. You know, I searched that out again, and I didn't see that there was any time that the potter got finished with us and placed us into that fire so that we could become hard. So what it reminded me of is that while we're clay in the potter's hands, that we're there and He can mold us and make us into whatever He wants into that moment. And maybe the next day goes by and we find ourselves in another moment and there's another need to be met. Well, we're to serve without bias. We're to place ourselves again on that potter's wheel, letting Him mold us and to make us for whatever's right for that moment to serve in that situation. We're the clay in the potter's hand. We're to serve without bias or without prejudice. We're to give ourselves completely to the Lord, to be humble, to be lowly before the Lord every day so we can accomplish what He places before us in that day. What would happen if you woke up every day and you just saw yourself like this old lump of clay here and said, Lord, I put myself on the potter's wheel today. Not that I've already arrived, not that you've already made me anything special. But Lord, whatever today's needs are, I want you to mold me and to make me into something usable for today so I can meet the needs of the people that I serve today. Oh, we could make such a huge difference in the lives of people around us if we just remind ourselves to be like that lump of clay and say, God, you mold my life. Help me to be pliable. Help me to be humble. Help me to be meek and lowly in your sight so I can make a difference in the lives of people. That's what it means to stay humble and lowly before the Lord. The first thing in serving the Lord is to be lowly, but the second in your notes is, He said, with tears. Look at verse 19 again. It says, serving the Lord with humility and with tears. You know, tears come from physical pain or from a heart rendered loss or from unbearable frustration and discouragement or from intense yearning or from an overwhelming sense of joy. And I don't know which Paul had in mind here, but I do know that in verse 31 it says, I did not cease night or day to admonish everyone with tears. So in this case, tears were tears of intense yearning for the faith and holiness of those that he was ministering to. But he doesn't say here in verse 19 is why he cried so often. What should we learn then? If these were tears simply of just owning an emotional time of weakness, probably not, or he wouldn't have put that out there for the church to understand. No, I think what we should learn here is that serving the Lord means that sometimes we get so intensely involved in people's own struggles, in their own lives, in their own cares, in their own hurts and pains, that it causes us to cry along with them. You know, it's a characteristic of God to do that. Psalm 56 verse 8 says, you numbered my wanderings and you put all my tears in your bottle. They're recorded for you in your book in heaven. You know, I think God takes note of every tear that we cry. And He does not let them pass unheeded, but rather He gathers them up drop by drop and He stores them as costly wine would be stored into a bottle. Psalm 56 verse 8 in the Message, it reads so beautifully. You've kept track of every tear and turned through the sleepless nights. Each tear entered into your ledger. Each ache was written in your book. Let me just ask you, when's the last time that you were so involved in someone's life, so involved in someone's pain, so involved in someone's tragedy, that you actually cried tears for their benefit? Not something that's happened to you or your family, but in prayer before the Lord, or maybe as you were trying to console them alongside of them, you cried along with them. I think Paul was telling us, and in fact, admonishing us, that that's the way service ought to look. That when we serve, It's done many times with tears. Let's look at the last one, number 3. He said in verse 19, not only do we serve the Lord with lowliness and with tears, but he said with trials. Number 3 is trials. Now, why would Paul remind us that these dangers that we go through or that he went through, why do we let us know that we were going to go through trials? Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. That if he went through trials in service of the Lord, the odds are that you and I are going to go through some hardship. We're going to go through trials. In fact, Jesus said that in this world you will have hardship. James tells us that we're going to face trials of many kinds. We're going to go through hardship. We're going to go through difficulty. But let me remind you that we're to serve anyway. Don't become callous. Don't become so cold that you stop serving other people when things get tough. There's in your notes, I left it in there because I wanted you to have it, but I want to read it to you. I think it's so important. It's a little poem called Anyway, and it really sums it up way better than I could. And it says, people are often unreasonable, irrational, or self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you're kind, people accuse you of selfish or ulterior motives. It says, be kind anyway. If you're successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and gain some genuine enemies, but succeed anyway. If you are honest and sincere, people may deceive you. Be honest and sincere anyway. What you spend years creating, others could destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find sincerity and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have and it'll never be enough. Give your best anyway. And in the final analysis, it's between you and God. You will it was never between you and them anyway. Boy, Mother Teresa couldn't have hit it on the head any better. If you are tired, then hear these words of James. Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces, there's a work going on in you. It's producing perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work. Don't quit, in other words. Don't quit before what is supposed to be manifest and grown into fruition in your life is finished, so that what may be done in you may bring maturity and completeness, so that you'll be lacking nothing. You know, Martin Luther King in his famous speech, I have a dream. I think he was saying the same thing that Peter said, the same thing that Mother Teresa said, the same thing that Paul said, and the same thing that James said. He said, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He said, I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. When we let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state, from every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all God's people, black men, white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestant and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. I think to be free, and by the way, who the Son sets free, the Bible says, is free indeed. To serve like Jesus, to serve in freedom, to know what that freedom looks like. I think we're going to have to serve without bias. We're going to have to treat everyone as an honored guest. And that's why that's serve standard number 5.